Recognizing the member for Surrey-Panorama. No. On mute, member. Member for Surrey-Panorama, we may come back to you as I don't see you now. So we'll... Oh, I can... Okay, I hear you now, member. Please proceed.
Thank you. It is a pleasure today to rise and, well, not rise, I'm going to sit and speak on this motion today. I remember when I first got elected in 2017 and the kind of finance rules that existed for provincial elections at that time. And having come from being an MP to that, I was amazed at the unlimited bounty that could be given by both businesses, by unions, and individuals. And at that time, I also remember the many articles, not only national, provincial, but international, that were written about the wild, wild West. And so I'm very proud of the work that the Attorney General did at that time. And to bring forward legislation that would set limits for provincial. And some of that work was done for the municipal at that time as well. However, what happened during the 2018 elections, that it was realized that there were some areas that still needed to be addressed. So this legislation actually aims to do that. And for this legislation to be put together, just so we know, it wasn't just written in a vacuum. It was written in consultations with Elections BC, with their input. The Union of BC Municipalities, which represents every one of BC's 189 local governments and the Island Trust. First Nations that utilize the Local Election Campaign Financing Act, and the BC School Trustees Association, which represents all the boards of education. So input was sought from all of these groups, and then this legislation was put together. And I always think that when legislation is introduced, it's always worth finding out what the partners or those who participated in the input have to say about it. And I have a quote here that I will have to read out because I didn't memorize it, that UBCM President Brian Frankel. And this is what he has to say. These changes strengthen the rules governing local government election finance by increasing transparency, said Brian Frankel, president of UBCM. Local governments endorsed a call for these changes in 2020, and we appreciate the government's response well in advance of the next government, local government general election. And it is so good to see that this legislation does have overall support. And hearing my colleague from the opposition, I think there's a lot of consensus to be found from the comments he made. And I want to thank him for the comments he made, acknowledging that we do need to have some guidelines and that these things do need to get addressed. So I want to thank once again our minister for the work she has done on this. And I want to now start to highlight some of the changes that we are going to be seeing. One of the first things in here is going to be, there will be improvements in the regulatory framework for election organizations, elector organizations. And, you know, we have provincial parties, we have federal parties, and I know this is going to come as a surprise to some of the smaller municipalities around the province, but in many of the larger municipalities, medium-sized and maybe even small, there have been parties or pseudo-parties, often called elector organizations. But they basically operate like a civic party. And so that's why these rules are, and there will be requirements now for there to be, for these civic parties, elector organizations or groupings of people who get together to work together for an election, because that's what they become when they group together, is to register with Elections BC. so that they can accept contributions, endorse candidates, or incur election processes, expenses. Currently, elector organizations register with each local government or jurisdiction where they endorse a candidate. So this is a different requirement now. Now they have to register with Elections BC, and then they get governed by the rules that exist. And they have to be accountable for the funding they receive, not only during election year or for the period of the election, but every year now they will have to file a report on their finances, incomings and outgoings. And that's really important as well, because if you don't have this going on for the full election or in between election cycle, what you can get is once again that unfair, unfettered fundraising that could really impact. And you know, when we start to look at fundraising and put a level playing field out for everybody, the main goal here is to put the voter, those who vote, actually at the center of the decisions that are made, and to take away big business, big unions, you know, I'll use the same term, or big developers with deep pockets, putting in large sums of money with the hopes that they can then start influencing policy. And I think this legislation is long overdue, and I'm actually absolutely delighted that this is here. Now, also, there will be changes around election advertising. The pre-campaign period is now going to be extended from 29 to 89 days. 29 to 89 days, which means that pre-campaign period, election advertising, billboards, commercials, however it is, radios, which are very popular in my part of the woods, advertising spending limits will apply during the campaign period, and there will be accountability for the pre-campaign period as well. And there will be now new limits on third-party advertising limits. So you can't just go to a friend with deep pockets or an organization and they'll say, oh, you don't worry about it, we'll do the advertising for you. Once again, they will have the spending limits are the same for everybody, right? And that once again makes it fair. Now, often it's good to make rules, but unless they are investigative tools and enforcement, they are just there as guidelines. And what this legislation does is it modernizes our election financing for local government. And that means now there are tools for investigating and enforcement. And I'm very, very happy to see that. So that the Local Election Campaign Financing Act now has it so that the BC Chief Electoral Officer can investigate and can request records from companies that deal with online advertising to understand who is sponsoring that advertising and how much was spent, and request a court order to seek records from financial institutions. All of us like to think that all of us are going to follow the rules, but as we know, the people will find a way, and having these enforcements in place is really good. Changes are also being made to help with the administration of campaign financing, and such as extending late filing timelines, allowing Elections BC to make minor corrections, and allowing candidates and elector organizations to modify a campaign financing arrangement up until election day. So there is also improved framework for monetary penalties. There will be penalties for failure to register as an elector organization or a third-party sponsor, and failing to and penalties if you fail to include sponsorship information for the ads that take place, and penalties for accepting prohibited campaign contributions, sponsorship contributions, and loans. So this act, basically, this piece of legislation, not only closes some of the loopholes or some of the problems that were pointed out to us, But it also puts penalties and enforcement in place and modernizes that part of the act. And some people are going to be saying, who does this act apply to? Local governments. That includes your municipal government, and it includes the school trustees as well. So your local boards of education. And that's why it is really, really important that this legislation come in at this time. Now, I know there will be, I was shocked, and I know many of you will be shocked, when I heard a colleague who has ran previously as a city councillor saying that his particular, one of the organizations in the city where he ran, spent over $4 million on a municipal election. And I know for those of you who have met as I've traveled in the province before, that is just incomprehensible. But I can tell you, coming from the Lower Mainland, I find that incomprehensible as well. But that is why we really had to look at making a more of a level playing field, because with the previous financing rules and without the limits, what could happen is those who had connections with people with deep pockets, whether it be organizations or whether it was individuals, could gather large sums of money, could then impact the local media in a huge way by doing big buys, and had an advantage over those who may not have had those abilities. And I think that when you run to be a school trustee, when you run to be a city councillor or a mayor, or whether you run to be an MLA or an MP, your own financial situation and who are your friends and who are going to donate to you and who can you persuade to give you big dollars should not be determining who runs. Our democracy is stronger when we have it open and a transparent system where everybody has the ability to run and they are playing by the same rules, and there are limitations on the monies that can be collected. Now, is this going to stop some municipalities spending more than others? Absolutely not. But what it is going to do is it's going to limit how much a group, a business, or an individual can donate to that company. And that way, more people will actually get engaged in civic financing of this piece of legislation. And this is not an issue that is new. Issues around election financing, I know that I've been hearing about it for a long, long time. And I definitely know that other members of the legislature hear about it too. And my colleagues from Surrey will attest that we're not any different than Vancouver or some of the other bigger municipalities when it comes to the kind of monies that have been spent in the past. And I am hoping that this piece of legislation will encourage more individuals to put their names forward, to get to be able to serve as a school trustee or to serve as a local government, as well as, we already have rules for the provincial and federal. And this does not stop people from donating. This does not stop people from playing a financial role in elections. The only thing this does is says there's a limit of 1,200. And when there is a limit of 1,200, that is exactly what it means. And now with this piece of legislation, there will be enforcement tools at the hands of Election BC, but also to investigate if big companies, those with deep pockets, are maybe finding creative ways in order to support their candidate or their electoral slate of choice. And as I've said before, for many people around the province, the idea of civic parties at the local level may not even have entered their world. But in the larger cities, and certainly in some of the middle-sized ones, people do get together as a group to run on a platform, and there is nothing wrong with that. And just as we have provincial and federal parties that run on common platforms. So for me, having electoral organizations, it's what happens. And if it's what happens, then we need to make sure we have governance in place to ensure that the election finance rules apply to them and can be enforced as well. And with that, I am going to say, I would like to end my words. And before I go, I do want to acknowledge my staff. I have a brand new LA here in Victoria, Pavan Sodan, and he is stellar and getting to know the job. And I've really appreciated all the support he has provided me with since I have come to Victoria, setting up the new technology and everything else. So thank you, Pavan. And as always, thank you to Mindy Bansal and Jen Campbell back in my riding, who do stellar work in that area. And I do want to say farewell to Naz Sabharwal, who has left us and has gone on to work for another MLA. We will miss you, but the next MLA is very lucky to have you. So I do support this legislation, and I'm really happy to see that this legislation has support from across the aisle as well. Thank you.